Alireza Firouzja is flirting with disaster. It's sort of becoming his MO. He takes incredible risks, but they always seem to pan out for him. In this game from last year's Tata Steel Masters against Alexander Donchenko, he gets a position that looks scary to me, but he has seen deeper. It's really a great game and very enlightening. We'll learn a lot about chess from this. Welcome to Chess Dog. My name is John Montgomery. Let's jump right in. Alireza Firouzja has black in this game, and Alexander Donchenko has white. Donchenko was about 26-68 when this game was played, so two very strong players. Donchenko begins with d4. Alireza responds with d5. c4, e6, knight to c3, and bishop to b4. This is sort of an accelerated Rogozin system in the Queen's Gambit. Declined. Knight f3, and not wasting any time with the more normal, say, knight to f6, transposing into a mainline Rogozin. Alireza Firouzja grabs the c4 pawn, and this really raises the stakes because white has to be careful that black can't grab that pawn and keep it permanently. e3 attacks the pawn at c4. b5 defends the pawn. a4 tries to undermine the pawn that's defending the pawn at c4. c6 defends that pawn. And as it turns out, in my database, black has a plus score from this position. It's really nice when you can play something that's sort of high pressure and a bit unorthodox and still have a high scoring position as well. Having said that, computers still prefer the white position a bit. Bishop to d2, relieving the pin. a5, continuing to advance those queenside pawns. Pawn takes. So Firouzja takes the knight at c3. He has to do that so that the knight can't take the pawn at b5. Takes, and then pawn takes. So we see here the imbalance is beginning to form. Firouzja is going to have the queenside pawns and queenside space. Donchenko is going to have the central pawns and central space. b3 to sort of undermine those pawns. If Firouzja takes there, then bishop takes b5 check, then queen to b3, and white is clearly better. So instead, bishop to b7, bc4, and then b4. You push ahead. You give that pawn back that you took early on, but in return, you get these passed A and B pawns, which can get very dangerous. The bishop goes back to b2. It was threatened. Knight to f6, and bishop to d3 to help control that e4 square. Now, white is building up in the center. If Donchenko can get those central pawns rolling, he could have a vicious attack. Black, in return, has the queenside pawns and a very nice bishop at b7. His goal is to restrain white's center and push the pawns on the queenside. Castles, knight b to d7, knight to d2, perhaps wanting to play, e4, e5 to support that e4 square. So e5 immediately from Firouzja. He knows that if he just lets white advance in the center, he's going to be in trouble. So he attacks the center as quickly as possible. He wants to reduce white's presence there. Bishop goes to c2, queen to c7, and here Donchenko plays h3. Now this is actually the sixth most commonly played move in this position. It's not very common at all, but the computers like it. But it doesn't score that great overall. So h3 is not the most commonly played move. It doesn't score that well, but computers are happy with it. Rook f to e8. Bishop to b3 to defend that c4 pawn. h6. And this is the novelty of the game. This is the first completely new move. Knight to f3. Rook to a6. Now, I can't say for sure exactly the idea behind this move, but it does look like a multi-purpose move. The rook can move laterally along black's third rank, and it still has a lot of options. Knight takes pawn. Now here's the key moment. White wants to create a pawn mass in the center and attack black's king with it. Takes. Knight to d7 and f4. Now, a better move perhaps might have been this, bishop to a4. The reason is that this c5 square is a really nice landing square for the knight. That's a very strong square. And to get that knight off the board, even though you have to give the two bishops back, is maybe a good idea. But he goes ahead and plays, really the most obvious move, f4. Okay, let's take a look at this position. To my eyes, Donchenko's position is really scary. I have a hard time, I don't know, but I have a hard time believing someone like, say, Kasparov would voluntarily get into a position like this with black. There's these massive pawns in the center. White has the two bishops aiming at black's king, and from what I can tell, black's pieces aren't all that well placed for defense. Having said that, the computers actually slightly prefer black. Well, what does black have in compensation? Black has these two pawns on the queen side, the A and B pawns, a nice square on c5 for the knight. Also, the e4 square is weakened, and this bishop on b7 is very, very powerful. So there is compensation here for this mass of pawns in the center of the board, as scary as it looks. Knight to c5, a great square for the knight. Bishop to c2, a4, advancing the pawn. So you can see Firouzja using the imbalances that are in his favor. f5, Donchenko begins the march of those pawns, the scary march of those pawns towards black's king. b3, bishop to b1. Now, again, Firouzja plays another move that I don't exactly understand. He plays at a much, much higher level. Rook a to a8. He brings the rook back. And the computers don't particularly like the move either. But I'm thinking maybe he sees that he's advanced the queenside pawns as far as he can, and he wants to reroute that rook to a better square, is my best guess as to what he is doing. e6. The march continues, and now the dark squared bishop's diagonal has become opened. Queen to g3. A very, very nice square, and a scary square for black's queen. It turns out black has a lot of attacking potential in this position as well, with the assistance of that strong bishop at b7. Rook to f2 to defend the g2 pawn. Now f6. So white gets a really nice protected passed pawn at e6. However, the downside is the pawns have no more mobility, and it's really hard for white to open lines of attack against black's king. The pawn at e6 is great for an endgame, but you got to get there first. So Firouzja locks up the position, thinking that he's going to be able to win before you get that far into the game. Bishop to d4, he'd love to get that well-placed knight off of the board. The knight jumps into e4, bishop e4, bishop e4. Opposite colored bishops. Two rules about opposite colored bishops. They tend to be drawish in the endgame, but in the middle game, they tend to be great attacking pieces because they can attack a square that the opponent's bishop can't defend. Firouzja can attack on those light squares, and Donchenko has a dark square bishop that can't defend those squares. Rook to a3. It blockades the pawn, but the rook really lacks mobility from that square. Obviously, it can't do much there. Rook e to c8, attacking the c4 pawn. The pawn advances to be defended. Now, king to h7. The king is safe here. That's a Kasparov-like move. You know, before Kasparov attacked, he would move his king to safety. He gets his king to h7 where it is quite safe. Queen to d2 to control the b2 square and the pawns advancing there, and also to defend g2. So, here comes the attack. Firouzja plays b2. Computers say just play bishop c6, but he plays b2. And the idea is, obviously, that pawn is hanging. He's giving up the pawn. But that when white takes it, he'll be able to activate his rook. White should have taken with the bishop. And white's doing okay here. But he took with the queen. And that allows Firouzja to play rook a to b8, which means his rook gets on that file with tempo against the queen. The queen has to move, and now white is in big trouble. Queen to a2. And from this point, by the way, Firouzja plays computer-perfect chess. His move matches the engine. It's really, really accurate chess from Firouzja. Rook to b1 check. Rook to f1. Rook c to b8. And the computer, believe it or not, gives a forced mate in 15 here. It's amazing. And again, Firouzja plays perfectly from this point forward. Queen to f2, rook to f1. The king takes. If the queen takes, obviously black can just play rook to b1 and pin the queen and win easily that way. But an even faster win is something like bishop to g2. A white can't retake because rook to b1 is mate. The queen is pinned by the other queen, and that would be mate. So Donchenko takes with the king. Rook to b1 check, king to e2, queen to b8, threatening to bring that queen into the position. The queen can check at b5 and maybe penetrate deeper at a later point. Queen to f4, of course, Donchenko would love to get that queen off the board. No way. Queen to b5 check, king to d2, queen to b4 check, bishop to c3 blocking the check but giving up the rook, but getting the bishop in return. So he's given up an exchange. He's hoping he can survive, but as we already know, it's a forced mate, and Firouzja's playing perfectly. Queen to c1 check, king d3, queen to f1 check, and in this position, Alexander Donchenko resigned. And here's the reason why. King to d4, rook to d1 check, bishop to d2, rook d2, king c3, queen c1 check. This is the forced mate. Queen c2, rook c2 check, king to b4, rook b2, king to a5, queen takes, pawn, boom, boom, and mate. So Firouzja continues to play into positions that are incredibly dangerous, at least to the eyeballs, and keeps finding a way to win. I'm really enjoying trying to unlock the genius of Firouzja. You know, it's beyond my understanding. I'm trying to get a sense of what he's doing, and I hope you're enjoying this exploratory process with me. Thank you for joining us at Chess Dog. See you again soon. Bye.